Please give a warm welcome to Davis Guggenheim.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Davis. Welcome back. I've known your work for such a long time and admired it. And I've always thought of it as serious work. And it was so delightful to watch this film because there's a lightness to it.
Is something enjoyable about it?
A lightness. I mean, to it. Can you tell us about that shift?
Thank you for asking that, and thank you guys for coming today. It's I love seeing it together, and I love seeing it on the big screen. So thank you.
Yeah. And we love having you.
It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Roger. What I aspire to in every movie is to find a personal connection to the story, so that in the making of that story, I can change. Mm-hmm. And the telling of the story opens me up. And I was looking for a movie, it was about 3 years ago, it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and I was feeling really low and depressed. And it's interesting, a couple years earlier, my wife and I had a therapist, we're in therapy together, and she says, you know, you guys are dealing with a lot of loss right now. And I remember getting in the car with my wife and going, what is she talking about? We don't have any loss. Like, we're doing great. But what I didn't realize is that we were. I mean, we're the luckiest people alive, and our children are healthy, and we're healthy, but our life is changing. I'm getting older, my kids are moving out. And I realized later that she saw something, my therapist saw something that I didn't see, which was I was depressed. And I started reading these interviews with Michael J. Fox, and then I started reading his books. And his books had such lightness and levity within the drama and the heaviness of his life, especially as he was suffering, having these terrible falls. And I said, there's something in there for me. And there's something that he has, even though I don't have Parkinson's, that I want. Mm-hmm. Kind of an optimism or a kind of joy that he finds even in the darkest corners of his own experience.
I mentioned to you that my dad died of Parkinson's. The moment that hits me so hard whenever I watch your film is when you ask him, you know, what about the pain?
Yeah.
You know, can you tell us about that moment? And
yeah, so when I pitched this movie to Apple, I said, I always have a question that I started a movie with, and it was, what happens when an incurable optimist confronts something that is designed to defeat that optimism? Parkinson's is really hard, and it's relentless, and it gets worse. And he has this optimism that is sort of unfailing. And in fact, we had kind of finished the film without that line. I remember looking at it and go, there's something I don't have. And I flew back to New York, I live in LA, and I hit him with that question. Because I feel like I have not pushed him hard enough on actually admitting that he really, in this year and a half I was with him, he didn't ever complain about anything. And yet he'd been in the hospital 6 times. He'd been in emergency rooms. He'd been in hospital beds more than he'd been in his own bed. But he never complained about it. And his answer was kind of shocking. I kind of felt neglectful that I hadn't done it earlier, but he was like, I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. And to me, that was a moment where I wrote, oh, shoot, there's much more going on here. And I'm sure, I don't know what your father's experience was, but.
It was very similar.
Yeah.
Just persevered without complaining.
For me, I realized that, and Michael would say this, I think he said it, he said Parkinson's is a gift that keeps on taking, which is both funny and also kind of deep, right? That, and I feel this way, that the struggles, the times when I've been most challenged, times I've been fired off of jobs, or times when my wife and I weren't getting along, that's where my father died. Those are times when I grew the most. Mm-hmm. And that's where life offered me gifts that kind of when things are cruising along aren't offered to me. And I think that's, going back to the first thing, is like that's what Michael gave me, the gift he gave me in making this film.
Filmically, when you do a documentary, and documentaries you've done in the past, the camera is constantly moving and looking for the action.
Yeah.
Instead, in this film, the camera, pun intended, remains still.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can you tell about that completely different approach to documentary filmmaking?
Well, for those of you who are documentarians in the audience, typically in a documentary, you've got your camera on your shoulder and you're following something. And that's sort of like kind of the automatic thing you do. And I remember coming to the set the very first day and going, wait a minute, like he's always moving because of his Parkinson's. What if the camera's just locked off? We just pick a shot and let him move inside of it, you know, and then pick another shot and have him move inside it. And I'd never done that before. I mean, when he's walking to work, we sort of follow him, but the camera's in a sort of, the shot is in a fixed, and it was a revelation for me. Like I was like, oh, that's, so it's fun to keep learning. And that was interesting, and it felt appropriate, and it seemed to work.
And how did he feel about having that, you know, the frame still and him working around it?
He is such a performer. You know, his Parkinson's is up and down. He feels not great a lot of the day, and but boy, when the camera's right there, he rises. He wants to charm. He wants to be funny. He wants to communicate, and so he was fine. Yeah.
And speaking of the interviews, he'd done 4 books prior to the documentary, and you didn't need to sit down with him and interview him, but you actually, you know, the heart of the documentary is actually the talks that you had with him. How did that happen?
Well, the embarrassing thing for me to confess is that one shot of him. At the beginning of the movie, I was like, well, at the beginning of shooting, I was like, there are going to be no sit-down interviews.
No talking heads.
No talking heads. We're not going to interview Tracy. We're not going to interview his colleagues or his children.
Why that? What was your thought?
I don't know. Maybe I was just being arrogant or kind of clever. And I think clever is always the enemy sometimes. And then, weirdly, I was doing a commercial. I was shooting a commercial up in San Francisco, and this cinematographer showed me this one shot, which is what you see in the movie. And it's this, I've never done it before, where you can be this far apart between you, Roger, and me.
Yeah, the Interrotron?
Not the Interrotron. So, Interrotron's a camera invented by, or maybe not invented, but
made popular by Errol Morris.
Errol Morris, who did Thin Blue Line.
Thin Blue Line, and he has Pigeon Tunnel coming.
He just did Pigeon Tunnel and also Fog of War. He's my hero. But it's a thing where they put a mirror here, and a two-way mirror or one-way mirror, and so you're not looking, well, it's here, if you're the interviewer, they're looking at a projection of me. But what that effect is that you're looking straight into the camera. And so that was for the first time documentaries, the subjects would look directly in the camera as opposed to just off. That's too inside baseball. But the point is that I never liked it because there was always this piece of glass. And I like to talk to people. I want to connect. But this one shot allowed the camera to be just here. And I can't see your mouth, but I can see your eyes. But you and I could be really close to each other. In other documentaries, you're like 10 feet apart, and there's a big crew there. But he and I were just like this. I said, well, let me try that with Michael. So we did one day of it. And it was so good that I just kept doing more and more and more. And he was so, like I said, he just sort of came alive, and he was so funny. And so he's so deep as well, so wise, that I just thought, well, we have to do more of this.
In total, how many interviews did you do with him?
I think it was like 6 or 7 days. His Parkinson's was up and down, so we would set it up and just wait till he was feeling good enough to, and then we'd shoot and he'd stop and take a break and take a nap. and then you come back up again. And so we would get a couple hours a day. So it's not a lot, but what you got from him was so. I confess another thing, which is that I thought I liked his movies. I thought he was a funny guy, and I thought, well, funny guys aren't deep. And I think we tend to dismiss people. The Academy doesn't give many Academy Awards to funny actors.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think we all share this kind of thing, like, well, you're funny, that means you're kind of, skin deep. And what I realized about Michael, he's extremely deep. He really has something, and he's charming and he's funny, but underneath it, and he's also self-effacing, so he's not trying to be a teacher, but I think there's something very fundamentally deep in what he has to say, to me.
You also, and your editor, do this amazing approach where you, of course, do reenactments, but you also grab Michael J. Fox movies and edit them to seem like we're watching reenactments. Can you talk about that process? And how did you guys arrive at that genius?
So my editor's name is Michael Hart, and he is a genius. He's from Donegal, Ireland. And he worked mostly out of London, and so we were 9 hours apart. So I would start I would start and edit something, and we would start with Michael J. Fox's voice because we had his books on tape, and so we would do it. For instance, the Back to the Future sequence where he's doing Family Ties in the day and Back to the Future at night. We knew that was going to be a great scene because it was written so well, and I would just storyboard those. I would. Meaning he'd have his voice, and I'd storyboard it. And I'd put them in, and just really clumsily, and put them in. And then I'd go home and go to bed. And I'd wake up the next morning, and Mike would take them all out and put shots of other things, like Back to the Future, or Secret of My Success.
Or Bright Lights, Big City.
And I was like, what? You can't do that. And then he would go too far, and then I would go in, and I'd keep some of his stuff and put some storyboards in. And what's interesting is, like, there are a lot of creative people in this room, but, like, I always think, like, you as a creative person, you're avoiding battles. You don't want someone to tell you what to do. But then as I think back, my best experiences were when I had a really healthy battle with a very strong collaborator. And Michael Hart and I had this incredible collaborator that happened over time zones. I'd wake up and change something, and he'd wake up and change something, and by the end, it became this kind of thing where Back to the Future, that whole sequence, we call it moonlighting, has Bright Lights, Big City in it. It has stuff that I shot in Vancouver. It has Family Ties in it. It has behind the scenes stuff, and it just becomes this.
So to clarify, you shot in reenactments, then you also had the clips from his other movies, and you guys put it in the blender, and
there was a blender. A 18-month blender. But to be clear, when Michael J. Fox walks into the office and Gary David Goldberg gives him the script for Back to the Future, there was no footage of that. And can you imagine you're on Family Ties and someone says, well, here's Back to the Future, would you like to be in it? And so I was like, well, I'm going to reenact that. And Michael Hart says, no, there's these shots from Secret of My Success where Michael J. Fox, at about that age, walks into an office. And forget the other guy in the scene, I'm just going to use those close-ups. And then I said, well, we need something else. So I shot the desk where the script lands. And then right away we're going to a shot I did in Vancouver where an actor's running down the steps with his coffee and getting in a car and going to work, and then there's a shot of Family Ties where he comes out on the set of Family Ties, and that's what Michael did. So it became this battle between me and Michael to see who could win that scene, and in the end, we both sort of won because.
How did you gauge how much the audience was willing to buy into what you've done until you show the film to people?
That is a great question. I mean, like that's what you just don't know. And we were like, are we going too far here? Will people like say, this is not only we can't follow it, or this is not documentaries, or I'm offended. You're screwing with what a documentary is, you know? And so we would definitely go too far. And we would have we'd have a cut, and then we'd screen it in front of people who are not in the business, people who are in the business, talk about it, screen it again, pull it back. We had a scene where when Michael J. Fox's father dies, and it was a terrible moment in his life. We had a shot from one of Michael J. Fox's movies where he's talking to a doctor in a hallway. I forget which movie it was. And my friend goes, "You can't do that." So we went too far a lot of times, but that's kind of fun.
The one that gets me is him and Tracy Pollan meeting and courting, and then you actually, it's not recreations, it's from, from their movies. And how did they feel when they saw the final product?
So that shot was shot by Gordon Willis, who is a cinematographer of Godfather 1 and 2 and 100 other amazing, like the most incredible, my favorite cinematographer of all time. And he was at the end of his career, and he shot this movie, Bright Lights, Big City. And by coincidence, there's a scene where Michael is dating Tracy Pollan, an actress, in that movie, but they are actually at about the age where they are dating. And the first, most people don't catch it, but the first line is, she says, "I guess I'm supposed to be really impressed by your job." And of course, he's one of the biggest he's like one of the most famous actors in the world right now. And there they are walking down the street, romantically in silhouette, lit by Gordon Willis, and then they kiss. It's like, in that respect, we just got super lucky. But we didn't know, again, we didn't know if that would work or not. We didn't know if the audience could take the leap of imagination to one say, "Oh, that's them," and the other is to say, "Well, I know that's a movie, but can I go along with can I take that leap of faith?" Mm-hmm. And so far, it seems to. Did it bother anybody? Okay. You? Okay, good. Thank you.
Your film evades so many cliches, celebrity, the fame, and also the handicap. Right. Were you conscious of the fact that I don't want to go through those and deal with those cliches?
Yeah, I think when I first talked to Michael J. Fox, he was in Carpinteria, actually. And it's the only thing he ever asked of me was no violins. So he says, I go, "I want to do a movie." He goes, "I'm in." So no violins. And in fact, there was this, I was on the mixing stage when we finished the movie, and I'm like, fuck, I hope he meant metaphorically, because there's so many violins in this score. But he didn't want to be pitied. He didn't want to be seen as someone or as this person who has an affliction. And that was my promise to him, is not to do that.
Mm-hmm. Did the books help you create the script? Or?
The books gave a lot of it, but the big breakthrough in the editing was at the beginning of the movie. You see him wake up, as he is now, and he's 61-ish, about that.
After partying with Woody Harrelson?
But he's now in his bed, and you can see his feet are tight, and he's brushing his teeth, and you can see his hand move. And we put that in there on purpose because the idea is that people say, "Oh, okay, this is that movie. This is about a person who's got a disease or a sickness." But then right after that, I asked this question, which is like, is this everyone's into their narrative? Is this a sad sack story of a guy who gets Parkinson's and it crushes him? And he gives this incredible answer. He just looks and he just says, "That's boring." And immediately you go, okay, I'm not going to watch that movie. I'm going to watch a holistically new movie, and or not a new movie, but I'm going to see something. I'm going to see a person in a completely new and original way. Whether I like it or not, it's just whether it's good depiction or bad depiction, it's not going to be that movie. And that was really important to me for him because he asked me not to do that.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm still going to ask it. The feel of the film, the rhythm, the editing, the music, recalls a 1980s movie.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
I put it in the pitch. I mean, part of it was me being in this depressive hole, and I was like, God, my movies are getting heavy and unfun.
I didn't say heavy about your films. I said serious.
Public education, climate change, toilets with Bill
And in the
Gates.
middle of that, you get an Academy Award.
Right.
So.
But I mean, I liked it. I mean, I liked making movies that are about heavy things. I like movies that have consequence. But I kind of lost my own, at work every day, I'd lost my joy as a person. Forget if I was a banker, I just lost my joy. And I wanted to find that again. And so I pitched it with Apple, I was like, I'm gonna make a documentary that feels like an 80s movie. And that's why we call the movie still a Michael J. Fox movie. Because it was like, what if we made a film that felt like actually a Michael J. Fox movie? That had, Guns N' Roses and Electric Light Orchestra and,
How did it feel that you mentioned that you were depressed and all of a sudden you're encountering this boundless optimism from Michael J. Fox?
Well, that was it. I mean, after being with him, I would leave. I remember leaving his place in New York after a day of shooting and walking to my hotel. And I remember asking, why is it that I want what he has? He has Parkinson's. He's now had it for 32 years. He's had it since he's 29. And it's bad. I mean, he's broken his shoulder, his wrist, his other shoulder, his arm, his face, all the things you saw cataloged in the movie. And yet, I still today want what he has. I mean, that's interesting to me. And part of it's him finding joy every day, which he still does. I'll see him next week, and we'll laugh, and he'll tell me jokes, and he'll enjoy his children. And so that's why. I
think you capture something in Michael J. Fox, which I experienced with my dad, that they don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
Like we live in this sort of state of what's the right word? Delusion that like, we're going to live forever. And then all of a sudden, when I watch your film, is that Michael has this constant awareness of what he has.
Yes.
And the biggest takeaway for me is what I just said about that he doesn't want to miss anything.
Yeah, I think it's right. It's certainly that way for me. And I can go back into the illusion and think, I'm going to get my next movie, I'm going to do my next. But like, if you really sit and think about it, to really to love, to feel my own sense of loss, to feel my own fragility, and that in doing so, I find myself more grateful every day.
Well, Davis, thank you so much for being here.
Roger.
Amazing.
It's always fun to come.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah.